Philip Murphy, could you please introduce yourself?
Uh, Certainly, Claire. I'm Philip Murphy. I'm Director of History and Policy, which is based at the Institute of Historical Research. We're effectively a network of about 400 or 500 historians around the UK and further afield who believe in making historical expertise available to policymakers of various sorts and different levels of government. History and Policy was established in 2002 around this newfangled thing, the internet. And the idea was really that the problem with historical engagement in policymaking was that academic publishing is such a slow process that by the time you've put your findings up into the public domain, the issue has changed and moved on. So that we could publish things very quickly to hit the policy cycle and the news cycle. And that's what History and Policy started to do with longer form policy papers, which are based on pieces of historical research, but with clear policy recommendations at the end. And what we call opinion articles, which are shorter form blogs type pieces intervening in a story that's in the news at the moment. And just to say to those on the call, we're always looking for new pieces. So if you feel that you have an important point to make, drop me a line, and we can talk about this. Beyond that, we've always run a range of public seminars and workshops and conferences. We've also made our services available to public bodies and public inquiries. One case a few years ago was Kate Lampard's investigation into Jimmy Savile's offending on NHS premises. And we organised a seminar really to get members of the inquiry to think about the kind of the social norms of the 1960s and 70s. To really put the evidence they were hearing in that sort of historical context. We've recently started a new set of publications, short monographs published by University of London Press. We've had a number of policy forums over the years. Our longest standing one is the Trade Union and Employment Forum, which brings together former trade unionists and labour historians. And we're just on the point of launching a new foreign policy and diplomacy forum. Clearly an awful lot to think about there. We also run engagement seminars for government departments. We've had a very long running one with the Treasury, which is now nearly 15 years old. We started a new one with the Ministry of Justice a couple of years ago, with housing communities and local government a year ago, and we're currently running series with health and social care and with science and technology and innovation. And the nice thing is that they come to us and say, we're interested in this historical issue, and we set up panels of 3 or 4 historians really to kind of tease those issues out in dialogue with the civil servants themselves. We also have a database of expertise which we're about to launch,
Evet, evet.
so that
Yardım edeyim
members
mi?
of our network can be kind of more apparent to policymakers themselves.
İyi, çok güzel. Ben de 2 tane kazak aldım uçacağım.
The thing to sort of say in conclusion is that in this area, institutions matter. And the fact that we've been on the go for over 20 years means that we are increasingly well known, and that people from government and sort of public service now come to us with sort of specific requests. And that's really important, because periodically, you know, people will hold conferences about the need for policy, history and policy making. They'll set up new initiatives, but actually having a track record in this area is tremendously important in opening doors to policymakers themselves. So that's a summary of what we do, and the fellowship that we're advertising will enable someone to work with us for 12 months, both staging events around their own research and helping us more generally in those kinds of activities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. So a good sense there of the sort of focus for one of the fellowships. That's for a 12-month fellowship, and we'll say a little bit more about the process of application shortly. If I can now turn to Nick to say a little bit about one of our other partners within this Applied History Fellowship scheme, and that's the publisher DC Thomson, which is about much more than the Beano. Is that not true, Nick?
It's the thing everybody thinks of first, of course. We're delighted with our Beano heritage, but yes, obviously we do rather more than that. So I run a product called the Social History Archive, which is an archival primary sources platform, as Claire says, set up and managed by DC Thomson. And you'll hear more about the Social History Archive as we go through this event. So I won't spoil anyone's thunder now. But just before we get into that, well, first of all, actually, I'd like to say thanks for being with us today. We're really excited about this initiative, and you know, broadly, we are aiming to bring together the historical method that everybody on this in this meeting is familiar with, but bringing it together with real world commercial impact, and more specifically, helping to shape products that are going to be used by researchers and by teachers at scale. So it's all really exciting. However, before we get into that, as Claire's already said, DC Thomson is a publisher, Dundee-based, family-owned media business founded in 1905 by David Cooper, the DC of DC Thomson. David Cooper Thomson, whose roots lay in his family's basically late Victorian, so late 19th century newspaper interest. They published a newspaper called the Dundee Courier, the Daily Argus, and others besides. So we go back a while, but over the course of the 20th century, we grew from this foundation of Scottish newspaper publishing. That's really, you know, it wasn't really still is our heartland. But we developed into, I mean, you know, we call ourselves a powerhouse. I'm not sure everybody would believe that, but we were pretty instrumental in all sorts of areas of popular culture through our publishing. So we launched story papers, for example, in the 1920s. We were among the first publishers to do that. And yes, landmark comics, like indeed the Beano and the Dandy, and later on, magazines like Jackie, all of which together we think defined generations of children's reading. In fact, we've actually just published the entire Jackie archive on our platform. So, you know, that's something that we hope, and in fact, we're running a webinar on it in about 3 weeks' time. So you can see how the publishing side of the business is informing the academic side of the business already. So yeah, more recently, I suppose over the last sort of 20, 25 years, unlike lots of other publishers, we've expanded into digital publishing. We're looking at several thematic areas, one of which is history, which obviously brings us here today. So DC Thomson's History Group, which we are part of, brings together a few different elements of the business. So the newspaper and magazine archives that we have been building over the last, frankly, you know, century plus. Genealogy businesses. So we have two family history oriented products, Find My Past being one of them, and the British Newspaper Archive, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is another. And of course, the academic publishing platform, the Social History Archive, that that we'll talk about today. We've been around for about 18 months, but all of these things together rely on the collections that we've built as a business over many years, and which really power the consumption of history around the world already. And that's what we hope these, well, we know that these fellows are going to be a part of.
Thank you, Nick. And I'm, for one, very excited about the having access to Jackie as an avid Jackie reader in my youth. Paula, can I ask you briefly to introduce yourself as well, so that everybody knows who's on the call?
Yes, of course. So I'm Paula. I work with Nick at the Social History Archive, and there I'm the senior curator of our online digital collections. So I will be speaking to you guys a bit more later about the placement and specifically what it is that the fellows will be doing at the Social History Archive. So excited to delve into that a bit later in the call.
Marvelous. Thank you, Paula. And so we've got these are the two kind of places of application, if you like, the Social History Archive and History and Policy. I now want to introduce one of the partners on this, one of the additional partners, which is the Royal Historical Society. So Lucy,
Thanks,
tell us a
Claire.
little bit about the RHS.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. So I'm president of the Royal Historical Society. If you don't know much about us, we're what's called a learned society. We're a charity, and we exist to support history and historians everywhere. We've been around since, I think it's 1865, which I think makes us 160 years old this year. I think that's right. So we, what do we do? How do we support history and historians? We do this through a range of different schemes and programs. We do a lot of advocacy work, campaigning work, some policy work. We have a whole series of publications. We arrange events and talks. We have prizes for books and for first articles, and we have a whole range of different financial awards that people can apply to, and that we give out in order to be applicable for any of those, but not this particular studentship fellowship, but for all of the RHS awards, you have to be a member or a fellow of the society, but that's really easy to do. We've got a range of different levels of fellowship, from full fellows, who are people with a book or a book equivalent and sort of established research record in history, to associate fellows, who are people that are on that pathway with perhaps a record of different publications, to the level of fellowship that's probably most relevant to most of you here, which is postgraduate fellowships. So we offer postgraduate fellowships to PhD students and to MA students in who are studying history. It's very easy, it's very straightforward to apply. I think the fees are, I think it's £20 a year, and I think it's £10 for a kind of hardship fee. So if you're self-funded, something like that, it's just £10 a year to become a fellow. And then you get access to all of our events, all of our online publications, our training workshops, and crucially, the ability to apply for the funding awards that we offer. And we work in partnership with a group of other organisations, and probably key amongst those is the Institute of Historical Research, who we do a lot of work with. And in this particular instance, we're going to be supporting the partnership with DC Thomson, with Nick and Paula, and the Social History Archive, which we're really excited about, and we'll talk a bit more about that later.
Lovely, thank you, Lucy. So finally, I'll just say a little bit about my own organisation, the Institute of Historical Research, of which I am the director. So we're a bit younger than the RHS. We only emerged in 1921, so we're just a little over 100 years old. We are basically a home for history and historians across the UK and significantly beyond. We offer an intellectual infrastructure to support history making, and you don't have to be based in a university to benefit from our resources. We welcome historians who are just wherever they are, whether they're working in archives, whether they're working in museums, whether they're school teachers, whether they're working in community groups, or indeed whether they're working in universities or completing their doctoral studies. We're here for everybody who has an interest in the past. We have a library. Our home is also a library, again, which is open to everybody. We have free membership of our library, and it's a very lovely place to work for anybody who is in London and wants to make use of it. But we also have a UK-wide remit. So we have events across the UK. We partner with organisations across the UK. We have many networks that either we support or that we're part of. And there are two networks in particular that come out of the IHR that are supporters of people at the beginning stages of their careers, and that's History Lab, which is for PhD students, and History Lab Plus, which is for ECRs. And if you remember one thing from this event, remember that History Lab and History Lab Plus are your friends and they will help you. So have a look on our website and see about joining them. We also run a massive series of seminars, again, to which everybody is welcome. Most of them run hybrid, some of them run online only, and some of them are in the building in London. Those seminars are on 60 different topics or periods, so there are 60 series that run throughout the year. So at any given time, there can be up to 5 seminars going on in the IHR or online of an evening. So there's that real sense of intellectual ferment going on. Another aspect of our work is the fellowships, and we do that in partnership with organisations such as the Royal Historical Society or the Economic History Society and other people who want to support early career and PhD students. So those fellowships are largely based at the IHR, and our fellows across the board kind of work together to act as a cohort, receiving training, offering training, supporting each other, listening to each other's work, and just generally providing the kind of intellectual sustenance that we all need as we're developing projects or indeed completing projects. The reason that we're involved with this, and very happy to be partnering with History and Policy, which sits within the IHR, but is a separate network with a national reach all of its own, and DC Thompson, is because we realise that the challenges that people within academia are facing at the moment are not challenges that can be addressed by one organisation alone. So I think at this point, I will now say a little bit about why we have together decided that we would try this new initiative to see if we can be useful to people who have just completed their PhDs. So Applied History Fellowships, what are they? Well, really, the clue's in the name. It's about just seeing how we can use the skills, training, knowledge, understanding that we all develop as historians in a perhaps more practical way, or in a more defined way than going directly into an academic job. Why are we thinking about this now? Well, partly because we are all, I think, committed to the idea of bridging across the different parts of the history community. You know, history goes on in universities, yes, but it goes on in so many other different places. And it's really vital, I think, at this particular moment for all of those places to work together to demonstrate just why history matters so much. And how the different ways in which it can be a social good. We're also, of course, aware of the deeply challenging job market for those of you who are coming straight out of your PhDs at the moment. And we wanted to get together and think, well, you know, we already have fellowships and they will be running alongside this, but what else might we collectively be able to do to help people? And I think then finally, we also wanted to really make the case for the usefulness of history well beyond the university system. So again, a kind of a combination of trying to be useful to those who are just finishing their PhDs, but also demonstrating the usefulness of history to the broader society. So that's kind of why we're doing this, and this is the first year. We will be offering 2 6-month fellowships with the placements in the Social History Archive, and 1 12-month fellowship with placement with History and Policy. But this very much is a first year and a trial. So we want to see how it goes, and if it's successful, we all hope that we can fundraise to do more of these kind of applied history fellowships. But you might have to bear with us as we work through some of the details in this discussion. There will be time for you at the end to put questions. If you can use the chat function, that would be really good. And then I'll have a look down and see what the questions are and we'll address those. But first of all, Lucy, I want to get your perspective on the sort of current climate for historians and why something like applied history fellowships might be a useful thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? The current climate for most of us, in most, certainly in Britain, some of us were in North America last year. It's certainly not really any better there, though perhaps facing slightly different problems. But it's been a really tricky job market for people coming out of their PhDs, and where 10 years or so ago you might have expected to get a job in academia. I think that there's far less of an expectation of that now. There are a few, but far fewer than there were certainly when I got my PhD in the 1990s. So that's one element of this, is kind of thinking, what can you do with this PhD? What else can you do if you don't see a kind of a traditional career path for yourself in academia? Alongside kind of cuts in funding and a very unstable financial footing, certainly for British universities at present, there have been kind of cultural attacks on history. History has been demeaned and diminished. It's often been at the forefront of the culture wars, which has perhaps made it a harder sell for A-level students, sixth formers thinking about going to university, thinking about studying history. And it's also difficult for them sometimes because they're getting into a huge amount of debt. They want to study a subject for which they know there will be, or they think there will be, a better chance for kind of financial return on their substantial investment. However, if we actually look at, so I'm talking about undergraduates here, but if we look at the outcomes of undergraduates, you can see history graduates do really well, okay, in terms of what is often called transferable skills, the kinds of skills that we all know that we develop as historians, skills of time management, skills of analysis, skills of sorting through and searching through different types of material to construct an argument, and simply the skill and the knowledge of having a sense of the past, which is so often missing today. So these applied history fellowships, I think, as well as being kind of a useful, practical intervention for the people that are successful and are able to undertake them, I think they're also an act of advocacy for history at a difficult time, because they're another way of showing actually the kinds of skills that we have and the kind of social value that history brings to wider society. So it's a tricky, as we all know, it's a tricky, difficult landscape at the moment. We do a lot of different work advocating around that landscape, supporting colleagues and fellows in this in different ways, and I see this as another element of that.
Thanks, Lucy. Nick, I mean, you work in the commercial history sector, and as do you, Paula. I wondered if you wanted to just say something about your sense and perspective on what's going on at the moment and where the need is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most useful thing would just be to give everyone an idea of why we think history is important. And it on the face of it, it might seem quite unusual for a commercial publishing business like ours to be so committed to historical research. But I suppose there's a couple of things. DC Thomson, it is a slightly unusual business, family owned, very long standing, lots of commitments and goals that sit alongside the more obvious objectives that that you would expect of profit and growth. And in fact, for us, really, those goals are actually somewhat interdependent, and I think that comes across in the products that we've developed. So Find My Past, and also more recently the British Newspaper Archive, I think, are both good demonstrations of our commitment to public history, to history as it's done by people outside of an academic context, and that's just an example. So in that sense, I suppose we have long been interested in history. We are also, of course, recorders of history itself. Simply through the act of publishing, we're helping mark and you know, and manage and make history accessible, and have done for you know, for over a century. I suppose more personally for this meeting, academic research has also quite long been a focus area for us. We, you know, largely under the radar, but you might be aware of some of our longer term partnerships. For example, we enable the provision of census data through the ICEM program.
Sorry, sorry, Nick. Sorry, I think somebody needs to unmute themselves, please, because they're we can hear them talking. I'm having a look down to see. Okay, I think we've muted those. Thank you.
That's the one. Thanks very much. So where was I? Yes, ICEM census data, for example, is a program that we have been enabling for 10 years plus. I think we've got, you know, we've provided raw data from UK censuses now to over 100 different research projects. We don't charge for it. It's part of, you know, it's part of our ongoing partnership with the National Archives, and that's just one of the things we do. Or Cambridge University's CAMPOP initiative, which is a very long-standing research, you know, it's research enabler, I suppose. That's something else that we're involved with. Yeah, alongside that, we support lots of other university projects, individual pieces of research, and provide help for individual PhD students. So that's all been sort of happening, as I say, somewhat under the radar. 18 months ago, we launched the Social History Archive, and that was really to give institutions high quality access to the archival content that we hold at scale. We knew that there was interest in it. We were very committed to opening those archives up to institutions like the ones you're all at. And we've had some good early success. We've secured partnerships with some quite high profile university customers in the UK, in the US, and a couple of others elsewhere. But we've really only just started, and these fellowships, whilst they are taking advantage of historical skills applied in a commercial environment, they will end up feeding back into history as an academic discipline, because universities are our customers and they're the ones who are going to be using the material that we create. So these fellowships, I think, they're pretty integral to our future growth as a business, and we're excited by that. But they're also an opportunity to pay back to the sector in a way that we have done as a business for a long time, and we will continue to do. So alongside the RHS and the IHR, we're really delighted to be doing this program, connecting doctoral talent in this instance with commercial product creation, and really doing applied history in that sense.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think that sense of the circularity of the work, I mean, that absolutely crucial relationship between scholarship that is done sometimes in universities, sometimes in other places, but that kind of careful scholarship that is the bedrock of a PhD, and then the way in which all other forms of areas of the history world kind of rely on that and feed into it. I mean, it's a sort of beautiful kind of ecology, really, of history kind of making. Paola, I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit, because of course you actually were an IHR fellow.
Yes, of course. Well, I just wanted to add to that from my personal experience of going through the process of finishing a PhD and facing the current job market. Not that long ago, a couple of years ago, Lucy and Claire's words ring really true, right? So I think the fellowship is a really good opportunity to explore what other career opportunities, job markets are out there in a position when perhaps the moment you're finishing and submitting your PhD, preparing for your viva, it's all very uncertain. And I think it's going to give a really good opportunity to really explore the real life applications of all those skills. I was very pleasantly surprised when I started working here. Gosh, like, this is what a PhD prepares you to do. So we're hoping that these fellows really, really feel that experience as well and get their feet in the water and see, well, a career outside of or in collaboration with academia is as good as a career in academia. And if it's something that they want to explore, that they feel very empowered by this placement to do so as well. So I guess that's, from a more personal point of view, I think that was a really good experience for me to go through, and we're hoping we are offering something like that as well.
Thank you so much, Paula. That's just really, really helpful. And that sense of you being the nearest person amongst us to this particular career stage is really, really helpful. Philip, I mean, history and policy is probably the trailblazer of applied history. I mean, there's if you go to the history and policy pages, there are blogs written about applied history from a very long time ago. So is there a sense of the particularities of applied history now, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that, people on this call will largely just have finished or be near to finishing a PhD. And that's the standard piece of training for academic history. One can think about that, academic history as in terms of a sort of slightly rarefied intellectual game with particular sets of rules. And the rules are largely about evidence, how we treat evidence and showing our working out. And to some extent, when we play that game in the academy, we try to stand outside the current concerns of society, so that our vision of the past isn't clouded by anachronistic contemporary sensibilities. And that, I suppose, explains why, traditionally within the academy, there's been a degree of caution, not to say outright hostility, towards the idea of applied history. But applied history is, after all, the way that most people outside the academy encounter and consume history. And over the centuries, history has essentially been a kind of a social form. It's been the stories that societies tell about themselves to facilitate cohesion and to make sense of the present. And today's storytellers are the publishers, the podcasters, the documentary makers, the museum curators, the heritage custodians, the archivists working for a range of organizations, including central and local government, private organizations, parties, and so forth. It's the tour guides, and for history and policy, it's the actually now quite rare teams of in-house historians who help government, but also our broader network of academic historians who want to help policymakers by making their expertise available. An essential argument of history and policy has always been that there's a kind of social duty on the part of professional historians to ensure that the history in the public domain, which most people, after all, encounter and consume, is of the highest possible quality. And we've also always maintained that one can do that without losing sight of our professional values. Because much of what applied history does is simply what we do in our ordinary research. We try to understand things better by putting them in a longer term context. And that's tremendously helpful to policymakers. As a policymaker, you're really only able to think strategically about an issue if you can sort of see yourself and your
Yardım edeceğim bir
actions
şey var mı?
as part of a much longer term continuum, rather than the perspective of the morning's newspaper headlines. So my sense, having been director of history and policy for 4 or 5 years, is that it's not only valuable, but it's tremendously exciting to move into these different spheres and to demonstrate, the value of academic history to society. Back to you,
Thank
Claire.
you, Philip. Thank you. I mean, it does seem like in an era of fake news, challenges of AI and where it's going to take us, the need to interrogate evidence, that this should really be the time for historians, and people should be really just queuing around the block to get the services of historians. So kind of these very particular applications of the historian's skill set really do help to demonstrate, you know, how we can contribute, whether in history and policy or through the Social History Archive. So I think at this point, we'll now start thinking or talking a little bit about the specifics of these fellowships. And the first thing I want to say is that these fellowships sit alongside a suite of other fellowships that the IHR, with its partners, kind of runs and hosts. So we're not replacing those fellowships. Those fellowships are for writing up the PhD, they're for the early stages of postdoctoral projects. We're adding to them. And because we are adding to them in a kind of complementary way, we will be encouraging the fellows, the people who take these fellowships up, to really immerse themselves in the world of the IHR, the world of the RHS, the world of the discipline, as we encourage our other fellows to do. I think we'll also be making sure that the fellows are aware of all of the training opportunities that are available to them, and crucially to have some time within the fellowship to work on their own publications, to work on their own research, and we will be able to offer them support to do that. And we'll say a little bit more about that support very shortly. I want to say a little bit about the two types of fellowships we've got here in more detail, and then I will ask colleagues to explain the various different parts of it and the part that each organisation will play. So the partnership between the RHS, the IHR and DC Thomson will involve a placement within the Social History Archive. And there are two of these fellowships, and they will run for 6 months each. The second fellowship, as I've mentioned before, is a 12-month fellowship, and that will do some work with history and policy. Again, there will be within that an element, the ability to do your own research and publications within that, but also to contribute to the really important work of history and policy in making the case for why historical knowledge actually makes for better policy. Now, the IHR's sort of role in this, as well as managing applications and making sure that you can start okay, is to offer your sort of home, really. So, you know, you will be able to come use the IHR both virtually and in person. You will be encouraged to take advantage of all of our training opportunities and the seminars that I mentioned at the beginning. We will be encouraging you to involve yourself in our postdoctoral and doctoral organisations, HistoryLab and HistoryLab Plus, that I mentioned at the beginning. And we'll also be encouraging you to make individual contacts with members of the IHR, including our brilliant library staff, who will be able to support your library needs, your digital needs, but also the historians at the IHR, those who are employed by the IHR, but also the vast ranks of historians who hang out at the IHR in our coffee room and are really, really pleased to just be talking to people about history, as we all are at the IHR, because fundamentally that's our core business, history and historians, and how to help them. So that's kind of what the IHR will be offering. And I just want to ask Lucy if she could say a little bit about what the RHS is bringing to this. I mean, it's bringing many things, but the specifics.
Great, I certainly can. So the RHS is like I said, is really glad to be partnering in this first iteration, we hope first iteration of the Applied History Fellowship. So what will we be offering specifically? Well, first thing is 12 months free membership at whichever fellowship level is appropriate for the successful applicants for these posts. So these are the DC Thomson Social History Archive posts. And you can talk to us about what level that should be at. So that gives you access to all of the information. We send out newsletters and a lot of information each week. It gives you access to our workshops and our training events. You hear about all our talks and lectures that go on in London and around the country over the year, and it also gives you access, as I said, to apply for our other funding schemes that we have, usually small pots of funding to support particular pieces of research. So there's that. You will also have the opportunity, we imagine, at the end of the period to take part in an online workshop. If we're able to go ahead with this again or something like this again next year, to take part in an online workshop, something like this, talking about your experience to people like you in a year's time. So you get that opportunity to do a kind of large-scale presentation. You'll be invited to do some writing for the RHS about your experiences, probably on our popular blog post website. And you'll also get some mentoring from members of the RHS Council. So I'm sitting here today in the council chamber. I'm rarely here alone. There are 16 historians who are elected by fellows of the society who serve on council, and they will be matching the successful applicants with somebody from council who will meet you probably about 3 times over the course of the fellowship to discuss things like your career management, your ideas, what next, networking, and kind of this point that you're at a sort of transition of building, like how you're going to continue to build your career as a successful historian and utilize the skills that you've learned. And we'd also like you to come along to the council chamber when we're all here one day to have a chat to us about it as it finishes and let us know how you think it went in a kind of closed environment. So that's the RHS's, that's how we're envisioning our main contribution.
Thank you. Sorry, my muting is playing up. So that's really great, and I think that's a really valuable way of helping people in these early stages of their career. The distinctive thing about these fellowships, as opposed to some of our other fellowships, though, is the placement element of it. And that, not everybody knows how placements work. So I now want to invite Paula to tell us a little bit about just what the Social History Archive placement is all about.
Of course. Well, the 2 Applied History Fellows will be spending 2 days a week over 6 months working with us at the Social History Archive. This is going to be a fully remote placement, as we as a company are also remote first. And the placement is designed to give fellows hands-on experience in applying, as we were saying, all their historical skills, but into a commercial setting, and specifically with us within a digital publisher of primary sources. In terms of what they'll access, well, the fellows will gain full access during the duration of the fellowship to the Social History Archive platform. And this includes over 90 million newspaper pages that had been digitized in partnership with the British Library and all the leading publishers, and also over 2,800 sets of historical records that have been digitized from originals held at the National Archives and other many key partners throughout the UK and beyond. And they're also going to be receiving guidance and training needed to explore, analyze, and curate these materials. And that leaves us with what will they be creating during the placement. So the fellows will be designing thematic collections for our primary source series, and they'll be drawing upon these digitized materials that I just mentioned from our side, deciding which historical records or newspapers to include, and creating the materials that accompany them on our site. So landing page content, selection of images for the website, writing accompanying blogs and posts for social media, etc. And fellows will therefore be developing content that is aimed at academic audiences, but also wider audiences too, and ensuring that the collections and all the content is rigorous, engaging, and also impactful. And we're hoping that the key takeaways that fellows will gain practical experience in are digital archival research and curation, the day-to-day tasks involved in publishing digital primary sources, creation of content for wider audiences, as well as market-oriented thinking in history and professional project management in a more commercial setting. So a very hands-on experience of the many transferable skills, how they can be applied, as I was saying earlier, into a job outside of academia. I will say as well that fellows will receive ongoing support from us and guidance throughout. So this will include training and onboarding during the first month, bi-weekly progress meetings through the fellowship, feedback and guidance on any questions that may come up, but also opportunities to network with colleagues across the Social History Archive, and including, we're hoping, an in-person visit to our digitization studio in Boston Spa, which is where the British Library also digitizes a lot of their material. So this will help build skills and relationships for their future careers. So just as an overview, this is a placement that we think offers a very unique chance to see how historical research can be applied outside of academia, and a very rare opportunity to both combine that rigorous scholarship that all of you were referencing, but also with a practical and more commercial experience. So we're really excited to welcome the first 2 fellows to the program.
Thank you so much. And I think the key element there is really the kind of skills and training that fellows are going to are going to acquire, as well as the experience of working in such a, I mean, I quite fancy it myself, to be honest. The way you've described it, it sounds great. But sadly, I am too old. Towards the end of my career, not the beginning. Philip, would you be able to tell us a little bit about sort of a little bit more about what the history and policy placement involves?
Yeah, happily. I mean, it arises from a very generous bequest in honour of Dr. Robert McIntosh, who died in 2023. Robert was a graduate of the University of London, undergraduate at Royal Holloway College, and did his PhD at SOAS on the post-war South African state. And Robert was a very socially committed person. He supported adult education, special needs education throughout his career, was a local councillor. So I think it's entirely appropriate that this fellowship is about a kind of hands-on history and history that's socially useful, and it really honours his memory in that way. The IHR itself, when it was founded 100 years ago, styled itself as a history laboratory. And I think that history and policy is very much in that tradition. It's a laboratory of applied policy relevant history. And so I think what we're looking for in a fellow is to provide us with a kind of a case study of how an individual's research can be policy relevant. So that there'll be 2 elements to the fellowship. 2/3 of the fellow's time over the period of a year will be devoted to putting on a series of events, a program of events, policy engagement events, and other activities, podcasts, seminars, online publications, engagement events, around their own doctoral research, right? And if you look at our website, if you look at the History and Policy website, we have a section of case studies produced by my colleague Chris Knowles, explaining different academics who've done that sort of thing with particular organizations. They don't have to be governmental organizations. They could be pressure groups. They could be NGOs. And so part of the application process is to write an 800-word proposal, setting out how you would do that, how you would frame that kind of program around your research. And at the end, you would write, at least a kind of a case study for us on how that had worked, how you'd gone about it, what you saw the benefits. And the other 1/3 of your time would be working with me, supporting History and Policy in its day-to-day activities. And those are the sort of things that I described earlier on. And, you know, the reason I think it's important that this is a sort of 12-month program is it takes a little bit of time to find your feet. And as you're going along, that 1/3 could also be things that, although they're not directly related to your research, you've seen an opportunity and you say, Philip, why don't we try this, because we've been working with these people. And there's a lot of, you know, freedom of movement to do that sort of thing. My colleague Izzy Khan, who is our sport officer on a point-4 basis, spent quite a lot of time developing a series of podcasts for us on Labour leaders. And you can see that. So as those sorts of ideas arise from your practical experience of working with History and Policy, you'll be able to implement them. And it provides, you know, tremendous opportunities in a range of different areas. You'll have experience of editing policy papers, thinking about what makes a sort of successful policy intervention on paper. You'll get to use our podcasting studio, get some experience of putting those sorts of things together. You'll have experience liaising with a range of organizations, governmental and non-governmental. And really crucially, it's a tremendous opportunity to expand your networks, both within academia and beyond them. And just to say finally, you know, that 2/3 of your time that you'll be spending on policy engagement activities, you shouldn't think of that as sort of separate from your conventional publishing output. You think of it as sort of complementary, as something that will, you know, connect to more sort of standard books, articles, but allow you to gather feedback from a variety of different sources. So that's going to be the trick of the application, writing a really imaginative and persuasive 800-word proposal, but also alongside of that, a shorter proposal of 400 words saying why you would like to work with History and Policy and how it would benefit your career.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip. And I've just been keeping an eye on the interesting questions that have been popping up in the chat as we've been going and answering some as we've gone. But that's really, really helpful. And I think that, again, that sense that this is not separating out the two sides of a fellowship. You know, it's not like you do the writing and the thinking and the publication, and then you do the placement as a separate thing. That these two elements are very much intertwined. And that's because the nature of historical research is very holistic. And we don't leave our thinking at the door when we do more practical applications for history. At this stage, I just think that it would be a good idea to just pin down some of the application process for people, because I know that, especially with new processes, it can be a little bit tricksy. And I appreciate there will probably be questions about this either within this session or afterwards. Basically, because of the natures of the placements, there are a number of criteria that we have to hit with these. So we are looking for applicants with expertise in British and Irish history of the modern world. We are defining that as post 1500. Now, we say expertise, that means that, I'm just going to mute somebody there. That means that you could conceivably be somebody who is working across history and other disciplines. But have developed real historical skill in doing that. So there was a question in the chat about interdisciplinary scholars who work with history and other disciplines. And as long as you can demonstrate the historical dimensions of what you're doing, please feel free to make an application. We ask that you have submitted or will have submitted your PhD to a UK university between the 31st of January 2025 and the 31st of January 2026. Now, this is very much seen as a year for those who have just submitted their PhDs and who are looking for that next step, to think about how they might actually, where they might take the PhD, how they might really develop an impact and engagement profile for their work, and to be thinking about where they go next. We do have other fellowships which are aimed for those who are completing their PhDs, the Writing Up Completion Awards. And as I said earlier, we also have some ones that are for postdocs further down the line. But we wanted in this first year really just to start with this particular generation of students who have just completed. There is, of course, no age restriction on this. People can complete their PhDs at all stages of life, but this is a career stage specific opportunity. There is a requirement that they have not held. You haven't held another IHR fellowship, and you will need to have a right to work that extends for the duration of the fellowship. The money, the two fellowships, we've got the 6-month fellowships are offering £12,000 bursary each for the 6 months, and the 12-month fellowship offers a bursary of 24,000. And of course, the closing date is the 31st of January. Now, Philip has already mentioned the specifics of the application for the History and Policy fellowship. Philip, is there anything else you would like to add to that, or are you happy?
No, I mean, we don't, again, this is the first time that we've run something like this. We don't really have a model for it, but do use the full 800 words. The more detail and the more specific it can be about the sorts of people you'll engage with and what your strategies will be for that. I mean, obviously, once we've selected someone, we can help refine the project. But that will really be the trick, to be as detailed and specific as possible in what you propose to do.
Thank you, Philip. And in terms of the 2 6-month fellowships, like the History and Policy one, we're asking for a CV. We're asking for a summary of the PhD, because of course this is for people who've just completed a PhD or about to complete their PhD. We ask for a 500-word statement about your commitment to applied history, and on the sort of broader application and engagement work that historians do. It's really important with that statement that you demonstrate your interest, that you don't just write something that will be very interesting about how important applied history is. We're really looking for details about why you're interested and how you've demonstrated that interest in applied history. So that's what you will be submitting at the first stage. For the Social History Archive fellowships, there will be a second stage to the process, and that second stage will involve the shortlisted candidates being given full access to the Social History Archive to do some work on that, to present a project idea, very time limited project idea, but a real opportunity for you to get to grips with that archive and demonstrate what you might like to do with it. But we will provide more details of that to the shortlisted candidates after the 31st of January deadline. As Philip has said, this is the first year that this is running, and we're very much, as we always are when we run something for the first time, kind of finding our way with it. So bear with us, but we're really excited about the possibilities and also the opportunity to work with our colleagues at DC Thomson, at the RHS, and History and Policy.